"I'll pay when I grow up." A humble girl asks a millionaire for milk. The simple phrase from a child awakens something he had lost a long time ago: humanity. With his heart shielded by wealth, her request makes him question his empty life. What seemed to be an ordinary gesture transforms into a life-changing moment, filled with pain and discoveries. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll hear in your life. The four walls of the office seemed to close in on Robert Mitchell like a gilded prison. At 42, he had built a business empire that many envied. But on that late Thursday afternoon, while signing million-dollar contracts, he felt a crushing weight on his chest. The headache throbbed in his temples like a persistent hammer, echoing the frantic rhythm of his life. The last client had left just minutes ago, leaving behind only the aroma of cold coffee and the disturbing silence of another day ending without any real meaning. Robert gazed through the panoramic window on the 30th floor at the buildings stretching like concrete giants across the New York City skyline. His company occupied 3 entire floors of that commercial building, a tangible symbol of his financial success, but at that moment it gave him a strange feeling of claustrophobia. He turned off his computer with a heavy sigh and put the documents in the drawer. His secretary had already left, as had all the employees. The office was bathed in a golden twilight, illuminated only by the city lights that were beginning to twinkle outside. Robert picked up his expensive suit jacket and placed it over his shoulders, feeling the weight of accumulated days in every movement. While waiting for the elevator, an impulsive decision took hold of his thoughts. Instead of going down to the underground garage where his BMW awaited him, he pressed the ground floor button. He needed to walk, breathe the street air, feel connected to something real for a few moments. Perhaps the walk to his mansion on the Upper East Side could relieve the pressure he felt in his head and heart. The streets of New York City buzzed with the typical energy of the end of the day. People rushed in all directions, each lost in their own worlds, their own problems and dreams. Robert walked slowly, observing faces that passed like blurs, trying to find some meaning in that anonymous crowd. His reflections always took him to the same place, the inexplicable emptiness that grew inside him with each passing day. He had everything a man could desire: a 2,000-square-foot mansion, imported cars, well-stocked bank accounts, solid investments, and a constantly growing company. But why then did he wake up every morning with a feeling of incompleteness? Why did the success he had pursued for decades now taste like ashes in his mouth? Lost in his thoughts, he almost didn't notice the small figure approaching him on the sidewalk. It was only when a soft little voice reached his ears that Robert lowered his gaze and saw a girl of about 7, with disheveled brown hair and clothes that had known better days. Her large, expressive eyes shone with a mixture of shyness and determination that made him stop completely. "Please, sir," she said in a voice that trembled slightly, "could you help me buy milk for my little brother? He's very tiny and hungry." Robert felt something move inside his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced for a long time. He looked around, searching for a responsible adult, but the girl seemed to be alone in the crowd. She held a small coin in her palm, clearly insufficient to buy anything. "Where is your mother?" asked Robert, crouching down to be at the child's height. Up close, he could see that her eyes had a depth that shouldn't exist in someone so young, as if she had already seen more of life than any child should see. "Mom is sick and can't leave the house," replied the girl, lowering her gaze. "My little brother was born not long ago, and he cries a lot when he's hungry. I tried to ask for help, but people pass by too quickly." The child's words hit Robert like a punch to the stomach. There he was, complaining about his existential emptiness while a 7-year-old girl faced responsibilities that no child should bear. He felt small and ashamed of his own concerns. "What's your name?" he asked, gently touching the girl's shoulder. "Emily," she responded, raising her eyes. Again, "And you, sir?" "Robert," he said, feeling something warm in his chest upon hearing his own name pronounced with such innocence. "Let's buy that milk for your little brother, Emily, and maybe some other things you might need." Emily's face lit up with a shy but genuine smile that made something inside Robert move inexplicably. It was as if a light had been turned on in a dark room long abandoned. He couldn't explain why, but he felt that this casual encounter wasn't really casual at all. They walked together to a nearby grocery store, and Robert observed Emily with attention as she timidly explained what her family needed. Milk, diapers, some basic medicines for her sick mother. As they filled the cart, Robert realized something disturbing. He had no idea of the price of these basic items. How long had it been since he'd set foot in a grocery store? How long since he'd worried about the cost of life's basic necessities? When they reached the checkout, Robert handed over his credit card without even looking at the total amount. Emily watched everything with wide eyes, as if witnessing a miracle. For Robert, those few dollars represented less than what he spent on coffee in his office, but for the girl, they meant the difference between hunger and satiety, between despair and hope. "Thank you very much, Mr. Robert," said Emily, holding the bags with a strength that seemed disproportionate to her small size. "My little brother will be very happy." "You're welcome, Emily," answered Robert, feeling a strange sense of fulfillment that he hadn't experienced in years. "Now take me to your house. I want to make sure you get there safely." Emily hesitated for a moment, as if weighing something in her childish mind. Finally, she nodded and began walking, with Robert following her. They walked several blocks, moving away from the commercial center and entering regions of the city that Robert rarely visited. The streets became narrower, the buildings lower, and the conditions more precarious. Finally, Emily stopped in front of a structure that made Robert question whether he had understood correctly. It wasn't a house, not even an apartment building. It was an overpass, and under its concrete structure, Robert could see several people who had set up makeshift shelters with tarps, cardboard, and whatever materials they could find. "It's here," said Emily simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Robert felt the ground move beneath his feet. During all those years focused on his business, he had completely forgotten that there existed a world parallel to his, a world where people struggled daily just to survive. There, under that overpass, dozens of families had built their lives, with a dignity that deeply impressed him. Emily led him to a small space enclosed by a faded blue tarp. Inside, Robert saw a young woman, probably in her early 20s, lying on some blankets. Next to her, a very small baby slept in an improvised basket. The woman raised her eyes when she saw them approach, and Robert could see in them the same depth he had noticed in Emily. "Mom, this is Mr. Robert," said Emily with pride in her voice. "He helped us buy milk for Timmy." The woman tried to stand up, but Robert gestured for her to remain lying down. He could see that she was very weak and her eyes had a feverish glow that indicated illness. "Thank you very much, sir," she said in a hoarse voice. "I don't know how to thank you for your kindness." "No need to thank me," replied Robert, feeling inadequate in the face of this situation. "How are you feeling? Do you need any specific medicine?" As they talked, Robert observed Emily carefully, preparing the bottle for her little brother. Her movements were precise and careful, like those of someone who had taken on responsibilities far beyond her age. When she turned to him with a radiant smile after feeding the baby, Robert felt something break inside his heart. It was a smile of pure gratitude and joy, something he hadn't seen in a long time in his world of business and competitiveness. At that moment, looking at that small family who had found strength and dignity even in the most difficult circumstances, Robert understood that he had spent all those years looking for happiness in the wrong places. The emptiness he felt wasn't caused by a lack of success or money, but by the absence of true human connections, real purpose, genuine love. When he finally said goodbye and began walking back to his mansion, Robert knew that something fundamental had changed within him. The headache had completely disappeared, replaced by a mental clarity he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in a long time, he felt he had found something worth fighting for. Robert's mansion had never seemed so empty as it did that night. As he entered through the electronic gate, the impeccably maintained gardens by professional landscapers seemed artificial, almost like a stage set. The imported marble of the entrance hall echoed his solitary steps, and each luxuriously decorated room confronted him with his own loneliness. He sat in the Italian leather armchair in his living room, surrounded by expensive artwork. He had bought more for status than aesthetic appreciation. The silence of the house was deafening, broken only by the tick-tock of the Swiss clock on the wall. For the first time in years, Robert really listened to that sound, and each passing second seemed like a reminder of the time he had wasted living a life without meaning. He couldn't sleep that night. He lay in his king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling, reliving every moment of the encounter with Emily and her family. The girl's smile when she managed to feed her little brother remained etched in his mind like an indelible image. It was a smile of pure joy, of mission accomplished, of unconditional love. When had been the last time he had felt something similar? The next morning, Robert arrived at the office earlier than usual, but his mind was elsewhere. During the morning, meeting with his directors, while discussing strategies to further increase the company's profits, he wondered if Emily and little Timmy had slept well, if their mother was feeling better. The voices around the mahogany table seemed distant, as if coming from another world. "Robert, are you listening?" asked Sandra, his financial director, interrupting his thoughts. "Sorry," he replied, trying to concentrate. "Can you repeat the question?" Sandra exchanged concerned looks with the other executives. Robert Mitchell never lost focus during meetings. He was known for his absolute attention to business, for his ability to absorb every detail of every project. But that day, he seemed to be on another planet. The meeting ended with Robert delegating several important decisions to his subordinates, something unprecedented in his career. As soon as he was alone in his office, he picked up his cell phone and called his personal doctor. "Dr. Harrison, I need to talk to you about something important," said Robert, watching the frantic movement of the city below through the window. "Of course, Robert, what's going on?" "I've been feeling constant pressure in my chest, frequent headaches, and a feeling of emptiness, as if nothing I do has any meaning." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Dr. Harrison had known Robert for more than a decade and knew that he rarely talked about personal or emotional issues. "When was the last time you took a vacation? Or better yet, when was the last time you did something you really enjoyed, not related to work?" Robert tried to remember but couldn't find an answer. His life had become an endless sequence of meetings, business trips, corporate dinners, and financial analyses. There was no room for pleasure, relaxation, or genuine human connections. "I can't answer that question," admitted Robert, feeling a tightness in his throat. "Then I think we've found the problem. Your body is asking for a break, Robert. It's not just physical fatigue, it's emotional and spiritual exhaustion." After hanging up the phone, Robert stood in his office for almost an hour, just thinking. For the first time in decades, he genuinely questioned whether all his achievements were worth it. He had enough money to live comfortably for several lifetimes, but for what? For whom was he building all of this? Late that afternoon, instead of staying late as was his custom, Robert left the office and walked again toward the overpass where he had met Emily. He carried with him several bags of food, medicines, and children's clothes that he had bought during lunch. He couldn't explain the impulse that was taking him back to that place, but he felt that he needed to be there. When he arrived at Emily's improvised shelter, he found the girl playing with some colored pebbles while her little brother slept peacefully. She raised her eyes and her face lit up when she saw him. "Mr. Robert," she exclaimed, running to hug his legs. The simple and spontaneous gesture made Robert feel an emotion he hadn't experienced since childhood. Emily's mother, who introduced herself as Sarah, was sitting and seemed a little better than the day before. She was still pale and visibly weak, but managed to sit upright. "I brought some things that I thought might be useful," said Robert, showing the bags. "I hope you don't feel offended. I just want to help." Sarah observed him carefully, her eyes trying to decipher his intentions. There was a mixture of gratitude and mistrust in them, as if she were trying to understand why an obviously rich man would dedicate time and resources to her family. "Why are you doing this?" she asked directly, with a sincerity that caught Robert off guard. Robert was silent for a few moments, looking for an honest answer. "Honestly, I can't fully explain, but yesterday when I met Emily, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, as if I had found something I was looking for without knowing I was looking for it." Sarah nodded slowly, as if she perfectly understood what he meant. Sometimes life puts us exactly where we need to be, even when we don't understand why. As they talked, Robert observed how Emily cared for her little brother with a tenderness that deeply moved him. She hummed softly as she rocked the basket where Timmy slept, her eyes shining with pure and unconditional love. There was a 7-year-old girl demonstrating more emotional maturity and capacity to love than he had shown in decades of adult life. "Emily tells me you work a lot," said Sarah, interrupting his thoughts. "Yes, I have a company," replied Robert. "Or rather, the company has me. I can no longer distinguish where I end and where work begins." "And does that make you happy?" Sarah's simple question hit him like lightning. Happy. When had been the last time he had used that word to describe his life? Success, professional, achievement, financial conquests. These were the words that defined his existence. But happiness, that was a word that seemed to have disappeared from his vocabulary a long time ago. "No," he answered honestly, "it doesn't make me happy. I no longer know what makes me happy." Emily approached them, holding a drawing she had made with colored chalk on the concrete floor. It was a stick figure representing a man in a suit next to a girl with a bright sun in the sky and flowers all around. "It's you and me," she said shyly, offering the drawing to Robert. "So you don't forget that you have friends here." Robert felt his eyes fill with tears, something that hadn't happened in years. He took the drawing with trembling hands, observing each line made with such care. There he was, immortalized in the innocent art of a child who barely knew him, but who already considered him special enough to include in her small world. "It's the most beautiful drawing I've ever received," he said with a choked voice. "I'll keep it always." He stayed with them until nightfall, helping Sarah care for the baby and listening to the stories that Emily invented about imaginary adventures. It was a completely different universe from his corporate world, a place where time passed differently, where concerns were simple and real, where affection manifested in small but deeply meaningful gestures. When he finally said goodbye and returned to his mansion, Robert knew that something fundamental had changed in his perspective on life. He arrived home and, for the first time in years, didn't turn on the computer to check emails or review reports. Instead, he stood on the balcony, looking at the stars he could barely see through the city's light pollution, thinking about how he had spent so much time pursuing things that in the end didn't matter. He placed Emily's drawing on the wall of his bedroom next to the bed. It was a simple image, made with basic materials, but it was worth more to him than any expensive artwork he owned. It represented something he had lost over the years, the ability to form genuine human connections, to be important in someone's life, not because of what he possessed, but because of who he was as a person. That night, Robert slept better than he had in months. And for the first time in a long time, he woke up eager for what the new day might bring, not in terms of business or profits, but in terms of opportunities to be present in the lives of people who had begun to mean something real to him. The following days brought a completely new routine for Robert. In the morning, he dealt with the most urgent company matters, delegating more and more responsibilities to his directors. In the afternoon, invariably, he found himself walking toward the overpass, carrying groceries, medicines, or simply the desire to be present in the lives of Emily, Timmy, and Sarah. The transformation didn't go unnoticed by his employees. Sandra, his financial director, sought him out on a rainy Friday morning with a concerned expression on her face. "Robert, I need to talk to you about some changes I've noticed," she said, closing the office door behind her. "What kind of changes?" asked Robert, although he knew exactly what she was talking about. "You've been delegating important decisions, leaving earlier, and yesterday I heard you canceled dinner with the Japanese investors. This isn't like you. Is everything okay?" Robert was silent for a few moments, watching through the window the heavy clouds accumulating in the sky. How could he explain to Sandra that he had discovered there was life beyond financial reports? How could he make her understand that he had found a family that needed him in a way no client or investor ever would? "I'm re-evaluating some priorities," he finally replied. "The company is solid, processes are working well. Maybe it's time for me to trust the team more and focus on other areas of my life." Sandra looked at him incredulously. "Other areas? Robert, you always said the company was your life. What changed?" "I changed," he said simply, "and I discovered that I had a life beyond the company all along. I just never paid attention to it." This conversation repeated itself in various forms over the following weeks. Colleagues, clients, and friends began to notice and comment on the changes in Robert. Some expressed concern, others curiosity, and many simply couldn't understand what was happening to the man who had always been the very definition of dedication to business. The situation reached a critical point one afternoon when Robert received a call from his younger brother, Richard, who also worked in the business world. "Robert, I'm hearing strange comments about you in the market. They say you're acting strangely, that your head isn't in the business anymore." "What's going on?" "Nothing's going on, Richard. I'm just finding a better balance between work and personal life." "Personal life? What personal life? You always said you didn't have time for that." "And now suddenly," Robert interrupted his brother, "and now suddenly I discovered I was wrong. I discovered there's something more important than accumulating money indefinitely. Are you having a nervous breakdown? Want me to recommend a psychiatrist?" The question irritated Robert more than it should have. "I'm not having any breakdown. For the first time in years, I'm thinking clearly. Maybe you should try it too." The call ended tensely, leaving Robert with the feeling that he was distancing himself from a world that had been his for so long. But strangely, this didn't disturb him. In fact, he felt lighter with each passing day. That afternoon, he arrived at the overpass earlier than usual and found a scene that worried him. Sarah had a high fever, was slightly delirious, and Emily was trying to simultaneously care for her and baby Timmy, who was crying incessantly. The girl was visibly exhausted and frightened. "Emily, what happened?" asked Robert, rushing to help. "Mum got worse during the night," replied the girl with tears in her eyes. "She's very hot and can't even drink water, and Timmy won't stop crying." Robert didn't hesitate. He picked up Sarah in his arms, impressed by how light she was, and told Emily to get Timmy and some important things. "We're going to the hospital now." "But Mr. Robert, we don't have money for a hospital," protested Emily. "Don't worry about that. Your mother needs proper medical care." At the private hospital where Robert had insurance, Sarah was immediately attended to and admitted with a case of severe pneumonia. The doctors explained that she would need to stay a few days under observation, with intravenous medication and intensive care. While Sarah was being medicated and stabilized, Robert found himself responsible for Emily and Timmy. The girl, despite the scare, demonstrated impressive maturity, helping him care for her little brother, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Mr. Robert," said Emily that night when they were in the hospital waiting room, "thank you for taking care of Mum. You're like a guardian angel." The girl's words touched Robert in a way he couldn't explain. There was a 7-year-old child who had faced more difficulties than many adults would face in a lifetime, and yet she could still see goodness and hope in people. She not only thanked him for his help, but saw him as something special, as someone sent to protect her family. It was at that moment, sitting in an uncomfortable hospital chair, holding Timmy, who slept peacefully in his arms, while Emily rested her head on his shoulder, that Robert made a decision that would change everything. "Emily," he said softly, "what if I asked you all to come live with me? My house is very big and very empty. You could stay there while your mother fully recovers." Emily raised her eyes, bright with hope, but also full of doubt. "But Mr. Robert, we don't have any way to pay." "I don't want you to pay anything. I want you to be my family. I would take care of you, and you would teach me how to be a better person." The conversation Robert had with Sarah 2 days later, when she was recovering well from pneumonia, was one of the most important of his life. He explained his proposal carefully, trying to make it clear that he wasn't trying to buy a family or do charity in a condescending way. "Sarah, I know this might seem strange, but these last few weeks with you have been the most meaningful of my life. I discovered that I had a heart that I had forgotten how to use. You gave me something I didn't even know I was looking for." Sarah studied him carefully, her eyes still revealing the natural distrust of someone who had learned to protect herself from life's disappointments. "And what do you want in return?" she asked directly. "Just the chance to be part of your family, the chance to be a father to Emily and Timmy, if you'll allow me. The chance to take care of you too, Sarah. Not as charity, but as family." "Why us? Why our family specifically?" Robert thought about the question for a long time before answering. "Because when Emily asked me for help that day, she wasn't just asking for milk for Timmy. She was offering me something I didn't even know I needed. The opportunity to love and be truly loved. You brought me back to life." Sarah remained silent for several minutes, clearly weighing all aspects of the proposal. Finally, she said, "I need to think about this. It's not a decision I can make lightly. I have 2 children to protect. Of course, take all the time you need, but know that my offer is sincere and permanent." That night, Robert returned to his mansion with a strange feeling of expectation and anxiety. For the first time in a long time, he had made a decision, based purely on his heart, not on business logic or financial calculation. He had opened himself completely to people he barely knew, offering not just his house but his life. He walked through the empty rooms of his house, imagining what it would be like to have Emily's laughter echoing through the corridors. What it would be like to hear Timmy's first steps on the marble floors. What it would be like to have Sarah preparing breakfast in the kitchen he rarely used. The house that had always been a symbol of his individual success could finally become a home, full of life, love, and real purpose. But he also knew that this decision would bring consequences. His family, his friends, his co-workers, all would question his sanity. They would say he was throwing away everything he had worked for. They wouldn't understand that he was actually finding exactly what he had worked for all his life, without knowing it. Sarah's answer came 3 days. Later, on a sunny Saturday morning, Robert was at the hospital helping Emily feed Timmy when she approached them with a serious but determined expression. "Robert," she said, sitting in the chair next to the bed, "I accept your proposal, but with one important condition." Robert's heart accelerated. "What condition?" "I want to work. I don't want to be supported. I want to contribute in some way. Before all this happened, I worked as a seamstress. If you really want us to be a family, then you need to accept me as a partner, not as a beneficiary of your charity." Robert smiled, feeling a wave of respect and admiration for this brave woman. "Sarah, I can set up a studio for you at home. You can work with sewing and I can help you get clients. It would be our business." "That way, yes, that way I can accept." Emily, who had listened to the entire conversation, jumped from her chair and hugged Robert with a force that almost knocked him over. "Are we going to be a real family?" she asked, her eyes shining with joy. "Yes, my little one. We're going to be a real family." The move to the mansion happened a week later. Robert had hired decorators to transform 2 rooms, a colorful children's room for Emily, with a small desk for drawing and a bookshelf full of books, and a cozy nursery for Timmy. For Sarah, besides the master bedroom adjacent to the children's rooms, he had set up a complete studio with professional sewing machines and a spacious work area. But the real transformation wasn't in the physical changes to the house. It was in the atmosphere that was created from the moment the family arrived. Suddenly, the mansion that had always echoed with silence began to be filled with sounds of life. Emily's crystalline laughter, Timmy's baby cries that no longer bothered anyone because they represented life and family, the songs that Sarah hummed while working in her studio. Robert discovered simple pleasures that he had forgotten existed. Waking up early to prepare breakfast while Sarah nursed Timmy. Helping Emily with homework she had missed during the period when they lived on the street, but could now resume at a nearby school. Reading bedtime stories, a tradition he had never experienced in his own childhood. But the true revelation came 6 months later, on a December night that Robert would never forget. He was working late at the office when he felt a sharp pain in his chest, followed by difficulty breathing. He tried to ignore the symptoms, but they intensified quickly. With difficulty, he managed to call his driver and was taken to the hospital, where doctors diagnosed a mild heart attack. "You were lucky," said the cardiologist the next day. It was a warning from your body. Your lifestyle of recent years has taken a high toll on your heart. If you continue at the same pace, the next one might be more serious. While Robert was hospitalized, it was Sarah, Emily, and Timmy who took care of him. Sarah alternated between the hospital and home, managing everything with an efficiency that impressed even the doctors. Emily drew get-well cards every day and brought them to decorate the hospital room. Timmy, now 8 months old, smiled whenever he saw Robert, as if he instinctively knew that this man was important in his little life. It was during one of these visits that the moment occurred that would change everything for Robert. Emily had brought a new drawing, a family of 4 people holding hands with a big heart in the center, and was sticking it on the wall next to the bed when she looked at Robert with her large, serious eyes. "Daddy Robert," she said naturally, as if she had always used that word, "you're going to be okay, aren't you? We need you." The world stopped for Robert in that moment. Daddy Robert. The girl had just called him Dad, and there was nothing forced or artificial about those words. They came from her heart as the most natural thing in the world. Tears rolled down the faces of Robert and Sarah simultaneously. There was the confirmation that the family they had built together wasn't just a convenient arrangement or a gesture of charity. It was real, it was genuine, it was based on true love that had grown organically between them. "I'll be fine, my daughter," replied Robert, his voice choked with emotion, "because now I have the most important reason in the world to take care of my health, you all." Robert's recovery was quick, driven not only by the best medical care but mainly by the love and support of his new family. He made drastic changes to his lifestyle, delegated even more responsibilities at the company, began to exercise regularly, adopted a healthier diet, and most importantly, established clear boundaries between work and personal life. Sarah's studio flourished. Robert used his business contacts to get clients, and soon she was producing custom clothing for some of the most elegant women in the city. But she also maintained a personal project. She sewed free clothes for needy families, especially those who still lived under overpasses, as she had lived. It was her way of giving back to the world a little of the kindness she had received. Emily stood out at school, showing brilliant intelligence and impressive artistic sensitivity. Her drawings decorated not just her room, but the entire house, transforming formal environments into warm spaces full of personality. Robert kept each drawing as if it were an invaluable treasure. Timmy grew healthy and happy, taking his first steps in the mansion's gardens, pronouncing his first words with the family gathered around. Robert discovered that there was no sweeter sound in the world than the laughter of a happy and secure child. 1 year after Robert's heart attack, the family decided to legally formalize what was already real in their hearts. The adoption process was completed in a simple but deeply moving ceremony, where Robert officially became the father of Emily and Timmy. "Now we're a real family on paper too," said Emily that day, hugging Robert with all the strength of her 8 years. "We were always a real family," replied Robert. "The papers just confirm what our hearts already knew." That night, after the children were asleep, Robert and Sarah sat on the house's porch, observing the stars they could now see better, because Robert had reduced the exterior lighting to something more natural and welcoming. "Sometimes I think this is a dream," said Sarah, leaning back in the rocking chair that Robert had bought especially for her. "If it's a dream, I never want to wake up," replied Robert. "You know, Sarah, I spent 42 years of my life accumulating things I thought would make me happy. Money, properties, social status. But it was only when I met you that I discovered what true wealth is." "And what is true wealth?" she asked, although she already knew the answer. "It's having people who care when you're sick. It's having someone for whom your bedtime stories are the most important moment of the day. It's working not just to accumulate wealth, but to build a better future for the people you love. It's being called father by a child who chose to love you." 2 years had passed since that first encounter on the street, and Robert could hardly recognize the man he had been before. His company continued to prosper, but now it served a greater purpose, ensuring his family's future and allowing him to contribute to social projects that helped other families in situations similar to what Sarah had faced. Emily, now 10, had become a talented artist, her works decorating not just the house but being sold at charity bazaars organized by Sarah. Timmy, at 3, was a happy and intelligent child who called Robert Daddy with the naturalness of someone who had never known any other reality. On a Sunday morning, while the whole family was having breakfast in the kitchen, a habit that Robert never lost since they came to live with him, Emily asked a question that caught everyone by surprise. "Daddy Robert, do you remember what your life was like before you found us?" Robert stopped drinking his coffee and looked at the girl who had become the center of his life. "Yes, I do remember, my daughter, but you know what? Sometimes I have the impression that that wasn't really a life. It was just an existence. My real life began the day you asked me for help to buy milk for Timmy." "So it was Timmy who brought you to our family," said Emily, laughing and tickling her little brother. "No," said Robert, looking at each member of his family with a love that overflowed from his eyes. "It was all 3 of you who brought me to life. You taught me that true wealth isn't in what we possess, but in the people we love and who love us back." That afternoon, Robert was in his home office, not working, but organizing family photo albums when he found the first drawing that Emily had made for him, that simple figure of a man in a suit next to a girl. He held the drawing up to the light, observing how the childish strokes had perfectly captured the essence of that moment that changed everything. Beside this drawing, there were now hundreds of others: family portraits, imaginary landscapes, fantastic animals, and always, drawings showing 4 happy people together. The evolution of Emily's art over the years told the story of a family that had found each other and learned to love. When the sun set that Sunday, Robert joined his family in the living room. Sarah was sewing a new dress while Timmy played with colored blocks on the carpet, and Emily read a book, leaning against Robert on the sofa. It was a simple, everyday scene, with nothing extraordinary in the eyes of an external observer. But, for Robert, it was the materialization of everything he had searched for throughout his life without knowing. There was his true treasure, a family united by love, a house full of life and laughter, a purpose that went beyond profit and material success. "Daddy Robert," whispered Emily without taking her eyes off the book, "thank you for finding us that day." "No, my little one," replied Robert, kissing the top of the girl's head. "Thank you for finding me and teaching me what really matters in life." That night, while putting the children to bed, a ritual he never passed to anyone else, Robert reflected on the extraordinary journey he had lived. From an empty man obsessed with work, he had transformed into a loving father, a loyal companion, and a complete human being. When Emily had asked for milk for her little brother that distant afternoon, she wasn't just asking for help. She was offering Robert the opportunity of his life, the chance to discover that true success isn't measured in accumulated assets, but in the ability to love and be loved. And so, in a mansion that previously echoed only silence, now daily resonated. The voices of a family that had found each other against all odds and built something more precious than any fortune. A home based on unconditional love, mutual trust, and the genuine joy of being together. The end of the story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Robert, Emily, Timmy, and Sarah has deeply touched your hearts. This journey shows us that sometimes we need to lose everything we think is important to discover what really has value in our lives. To continue being moved by equally touching and transformative stories, find our special playlist by clicking here. If this story moved you as much as it moved us in telling it, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like. Every day we bring unique narratives that explore the beauty and complexity of human life. Don't miss our next content. And tell us in the comments which